I'm Connie Alexander, speaking to you for Exxon. During the next 30 minutes, we're going to flip through a portion of the Southwest Conference history book.
But why, some say, the moon? Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? Why, 35 years ago, fly the Atlantic? Why does Rice play Texas?
Saturday afternoon, Channel 11 brings you some of the best teams in the nation playing football the way it should be played.
There aren't many states, if any, that care about sports more than the state of Texas does. Texas is home to nearly 30 million people, 14 major professional sports teams, even more minor circuit professional teams, and 116 college sports programs. Its high school programs number even higher. So it should come as no surprise that the state of Texas has been able to produce a significant number of high-level college sports programs. And a long time ago, there once was a conference that contained a good number of these high-level sports programs. And Arkansas. This was the Southwest Conference, whose descendants now form pillars of the SEC, Big 12, and American conferences. It was once able to stand on its own due to the state of Texas's immense athletic power, but could not survive its own borders once television money began to drive college sports as we know it. But even while it stood, it was not immune to its own forms of lies, treachery, and back-alley dealings, of which just about every member was guilty. This is the story of the Southwest Conference. Since its inception in 1845, Texas has been a contentious state. Born from white American settlers essentially warring with native Mexicans for the land, prompting an American reconnaissance war just to retrieve them, the territory of Texas, expansive enough to feature desert in the west, Great Plains in the middle, and bayou in the east, immediately became one of the young United States' most populous states. A slave state until Juneteenth following the end of the Civil War and still featuring many ethnic Mexicans living in their homes, even as far back as 1883, this is where we will meet our first main character of this story. The University of Texas in Austin. UT Austin was established to be the flagship university for the new state of Texas. To this day, its high standing academically earns it the status of a public Ivy. But aside from its academics, its standing as a flagship also earned it a wealth of athletic talent in its student base, which led to an immense amount of success once the Longhorns started competing as an independent. The Longhorns competed well, forming rivalries quickly with schools like the nearby Texas Agricultural and Mechanical College and Rice University teams, as well as the more distant but still chippish University of Oklahoma. Come the arrival of World War I, though, it became clear that independent scheduling proved to be difficult for these young Southern teams, and especially so for the University of Texas. Despite going undefeated without much challenge as a football program and earning an unofficial national championship declaration due to their dominance, it was clear to Longhorn officials that they would rather be in a conference than be independent. Acting Athletic Director L. Theo Belmont saw this and decided to make a change. He sent letters of invitation to a handful of universities in the American Southwest to meet him at the Oriental Hotel in Dallas to discuss the creation of the Athletic and Academic Conference. Those receiving invitations included a majority of large schools in Texas, as well as Louisiana State and Mississippi, who declined to join. Despite missing his big fish, Belmont was still able to work together with athletic directors to create the Southwestern Intercollegiate Athletics Conference in 1915. Its first 8 members were Texas, Texas A&M, Rice, Baylor, Arkansas, Oklahoma, and Oklahoma A&M, and the tiny Southwestern College, who left after one season. This departure would signal an era of membership turmoil for the conference. From 1916 to 1925, the conference gained and lost many schools. Southern Methodist University joined the conference in 1918 to replace Southwestern, but that addition was immediately offset by Oklahoma leaving the Southwest in 1919 to join their main conference, what would eventually become the Big Six. The Southwest backfilled with the tiny Phillips College in 1920, but their membership would only last a year. The addition of Texas Christian in 1923 would bring the conference briefly back to 8 total members, before yet another school, Oklahoma A&M, would leave the conference in 1925. With the 2 other Oklahoma schools now gone, Arkansas remained the only member of the conference not situated in the state of Texas. They would stay as such until their departure for the Southeastern Conference in 1989. By this point, the conference renamed themselves officially to just the Southwest Conference and found long-term stability, albeit only in membership. While the Southwest was an all-sports conference, it made its name on the gridiron, as many sports did. Texas's declared national championship claim in 1914 was accompanied by similar titles in 1918, 1941, 1947, and 1950. Similarly, OU had a deferred national championship in 1915, as did A&M in 1919, 1927, and 1939. TCU and SMU claimed a national title in 1935, with the Horned Frogs adding another in 1938. The conference was further able to solidify its grasp on college football by signing a tie-in with the Cotton Bowl in 1940, where it would send its conference champion every postseason. 1957 saw the Texas Tech Red Raiders join the conference from the nearby Border Conference, bringing the Southwest's numbers back to 8. Tech became the conference's westernmost school, but advances in airplane travel made their addition no big issue. This kicked off a second era of Southwest Conference athletics, known affectionately by old heads as the Glory Years, stretching from Tech's edition in 1957 through the 1970s. Many of its teams integrated during this time, though mostly as a means to an end for improving their athletics and not out of acknowledging the wrongness of segregation. Texas won an outright title in 1963, followed by outlier Arkansas winning a declared title the following year. Texas won another in 1969, following a Texas-Arkansas match that was so widely anticipated that known not a crook President Richard Nixon made sure to be in attendance, and then another in 1970. While football had long been the bread and butter for the Southwest, it wasn't their only strength. Other sports, like baseball, had long been favorites amongst young men in the south-central United States, but not as much so as it was in the eastern or western parts of the country. Still, Texas was the Southwest's primary baseball power, winning 64 total Southwest Conference titles and won national championships in 1949, 1950, and 1975, with Arkansas coming in behind them as another secondary power. But the real secondary strength of the Southwest Conference began to reveal itself in the early 70s, on the hardwood. The NCAA instituted a tournament to determine their champions in 1939. While many of the other athletic departments in conference focused on football, the University of Arkansas, while still no football slouch, began to break away in basketball. The Runnin' Razorbacks found themselves champions of the Southwest 22 total times and turned that in-season success into postseason success, making the Sweet 16 6 times from 1978 to 1991, the Elite Eight 4 times, and the Final Four twice. They were joined in their basketball dominance by a newcomer, the University of Houston, who joined the conference in 1972 from the ranks of the Independents. The Cougars had long been basketball stalwarts, but were made household names by their superstar lineup dubbed Phi Slamma Jamma. Rob Williams, Michael Young, Larry Michaud, Clyde Drexler, and Akeem Olajuwon. At a time where dunking the basketball had been considered unsportsmanlike, Houston responded by dunking all over everybody. Despite not winning a national title, Phi Slamma Jamma caught the nation's attention and threatened never to give it back. Arkansas wouldn't let that be so easy, though. When it came time for Southwest Conference basketball tournaments later in the 70s and 80s to take place in Dallas, Arkansas fans would flood the venue so thoroughly it would be referred to as Barn Hill South. But something was brewing within the Razorbacks during this time, a desire for something different. They'd been the only non-Texans in an increasingly Texan league since 1925. They were beginning to think about leaving, but they needed an excuse to do so.
It is a home game for SMU, 10-0. Ranked number 2 in the nation, coached by Bobby Collins, first year at SMU. The Ponies owning Division 1A's longest win streak at 14 games. And a win today gives them their second straight Southwest Conference championship.
It had been hard to win at SMU. With very few seasons above 500 since their declared national title in the 30s, SMU's small student base had truly become a problem in the athletics realm. Even a pre-Iowa Hayden Fry couldn't right the ship. Then, in 1976, the team hired Ron Meyer. After a few down seasons, Meyer magically brought the Mustangs to an 8-4 record in 1980, and then to a staggering 10-1 record the following year. After Meyer left for the Patriots, the Mustangs kept cooking with Bobby Collins at head coach. Despite being a tiny school, they smacked around the Titans in the Southwest for a few years, until a few run-of-the-mill violations brought them down to average in 1985 and 86. But the Mustangs were finally giants again, on the back of elite players like Eric Dickerson, who somehow got a neat car upgrade. It all looked suspicious. After discovering impermissible monetary benefits being handed from Mustang boosters directly to prospective players over nearly 20 years, the NCAA hit SMU with a 2-season bowl ban, the cancellation of their 1987 season, and greatly reduced the amount of scholarships available for them to give to new players. There was more extent to the sanctions given to the Mustangs, but they aren't as important as what the end result was. SMU did not play in 1987, and due to roster attrition directly caused by the sanctions, they decided not to play in 1988 either. When they did return to the field in 1989 under Forrest Gregg, they were atrociously bad. The Mustangs continued to struggle for years, only returning to and winning a bowl game in 2009, and were not ranked until years after that. The program was forced a hard restart. Soon it became apparent that if you weren't cheating, you weren't trying, and that didn't sit well with the other half of coaches in the league. Wealthy alumni at some of the Texas schools threw oil money around like snowballs. Team after team got tagged with NCAA suspensions for one scandal after another. When the death penalty at SMU came to a vote of Southwest Conference members, every team agreed except for, understandably, officials at SMU, but officials at Texas and Houston also voted against the deal, hinting towards their involvement in similar dealings, which later came to be known as true. A TCU booster admitted to creating a slush fund for the Horned Frogs soon after the SMU decision was made, in an effort to minimize their punishment by telling the truth. Members then started loudly pointing fingers at each other whenever they accused someone of cheating. These repeated scandals and sanctions weakened the conference athletically. Teams lost out on scholarships, which meant they lost out on talented players, which meant they lost more games. The Southwest was no longer a major conference, just a conference with a couple major brands. By 1989, Arkansas, one of the few schools without a major scandal, had enough and announced it would leave for the Southeastern Conference in 1991. This was just the excuse they needed to leave. The one major downfall of the Southwest Conference, even more than the TV money and the scandals, was itself. Everyone wants to be the biggest in Texas. Coaches pretended to be friends until the season started, then would go behind each other's backs to steal away recruits and formulate game plans. The close proximity between schools and the publicity of the accusations meant that these arguments leaked out of athletics departments and into parent-teacher conferences and board meetings and Sunday church services. By the late 80s, the state of Texas was on fire. Its makeup of solely Texas schools had also ruined its ability to compete for television contracts. The league's notorious infighting had prevented it from being able to adapt to the changing collegiate sports landscape, and their inability to capitalize after Arkansas's departure doomed them. Oklahoma's landmark decision in 1985 meant that colleges, and by extension conferences, were allowed to negotiate television deals, not the NCAA. With every school's alumni base sharing the same televisions in the state of Texas, and now losing those very few extra TV sets in Arkansas, the Southwest was set to lose out on the monetary arms race. Its bigger schools, namely Texas and A&M, had options. Texas looked towards the SEC and received an unofficial invite in 1989, only to defer a decision long enough for Arkansas to fill their spot. And then afterward, they explored the Pac-10. A&M reportedly preferred the SEC. Around this time, the Big 8 Conference, also situated in the central United States, was also looking to capitalize on the new world of TV contracts and approached Texas and Texas A&M about joining their league. For K-State President John Weefald, who coordinated the Big 8's offense on expansion, what I was worried about was Texas would join the Pac-10 in 1990. They'd be leaving the Southwest Conference, and that would be a powerful force to maybe trigger Oklahoma into joining the Southeast Conference. The first meetings fell through and Texas President Bill Cunningham wasn't interested. It didn't stay that way for long. Once news got out that the Big 8 was talking to those two schools, no other Southwest school wanted to be left behind. It then became a game. All of the Southwest would join the Big 8 and create a 16-team league, or none of them would. New Texas President Bob Berdahl, taking over for Cunningham, spoke to the Texas regents and then came back to the Big 8 with another proposal. Take Texas, Texas A&M, Texas Tech, and Baylor. Baylor's inclusion over the more athletically viable Houston was a point of controversy. It's well known that Texas Senator David Sibley, a Baylor graduate, lobbied together with Tech graduate and Lieutenant Governor Bob Bullock to the Texas state legislature to ensure both the Red Raiders and Bears inclusions with Texas and Texas A&M. If the Southwest ship was sinking, they wanted the last lifeboats off. Some people point to Ann Richards, a Baylor alumnus, as the one who pushed for the Bears' inclusion, but this is just not true. The deal was accepted. Despite being overwhelmingly for addition, this move left TCU, SMU, Rice, and Houston behind. TCU, SMU, and Rice were forced to join the Western Athletic Conference, helping it become a 16-team behemoth. Houston, however, chose to help start a brand new conference, Conference USA, instead of joining their fellow left-behind Southwest schools. This was not forgotten. To this day, officials at TCU and Houston proclaim the university's disdain for the actions of Texas, whom they largely blame for leaving them out. In fact, TCU has formed a rivalry with Baylor, dubbed the Revivalry, due to the college's Christian roots that was largely based on Baylor's addition to the Big 12 before TCU's, and some good football in the early 2010s. One can assume Houston fans feel the same way towards the Bears. But come the summer of 1996, it didn't matter anyway. Texas, A&M, Tech, and Baylor had already settled into their new conference. Those who didn't get raptured made the most of their situation. Perhaps teams like TCU and Houston can provide some hope for fans of teams like UConn, Oregon State, and Washington State as power conference teams that were left behind in mergers and tossed aside as not economically viable. History also provided more lenses from which to view the situation. It was always clear that the powers in the Big Eight and Southwest were never keen on staying together, even back in the early 90s. The idea that A&M and Texas were a package deal was proven untrue in the early 2010s, as the Aggies were the first to eventually find their way to the desired home of the SEC. Most interesting is that Texas, who has gained a reputation as a conference killer due to the way the Southwest died, made it apparent many times that they were also always eyeing the top of the sporting no, stop! Oh well, can't change it now. It's just going to be stuck like that. Whether it was through the Big 12 in 1996, the Pac-10 in 1990 or 2010, or the SEC as came to fruition in 2024, but it's more accurate to say that Texas had no loyalty to whoever they were involved with. Only themselves, which in the modern era of every school for themselves is very much the norm. It's not a problem per se, just the way it is. Regardless, the collapse of the Southwest made it very clear that power conferences were not invincible. And while the Big 12 spent the better part of its life on defense, prepping for potential collapse, the Big East faced a similar fate to the Southwest, and now the Pac-12 has found its way out of existence. If this pattern of consolidation between power teams and leagues continues as it has, it isn't entirely unlikely that we will continue to see conferences collapse as the money shifts hands in college sports. But if the Southwest has proven anything, it's that money rules these decisions, not academics, not athletes, and surely not regionalism. Only predictions can be made for the future, and even then, we wait on bated breath.